Good evening, everybody. We're going to tonight look at the basic panel and a few hidden functionality using modifying keys, which perhaps some people know, perhaps some people don't. So we're just going to look at that panel, and I'm just going to go through what the sliders do and a few bits and pieces that you might not be aware of. So let's just share the screen. Again, as always, if you've got anything that you want me to go back over, you're not quite sure of, just shout out and I'll go back over it. So type it and then right there. Okay, so the basic panel. This is set up as Lightroom comes out of the box from Adobe. But just to let you know before we start, you can change all this order and you can turn off panels. So in the develop module, next to the word basic, or it can be next to any of the words, we go right click and it comes up customize develop panel, and we can move the order around so into your workflow status, and you can untick if you want to hide the panels. You then press save. You have to exit Classic, reopen it, and it will appear in the order as it is here. Okay, so just to let you know that. So, basic panel. Out of the box, it comes at the top, and let's just go through it from the top downwards. We have these auto buttons, so it's technical at the moment as we talk. In the future, I think that auto button will be replaced to AI. So it will be artificial intelligence will look at the image, will learn, and will apply a style. I think that Adobe will be offering a service in the future where it learns your stylization. And stylization is something that we will look at after the summer recess about styling your images on a Monday afternoon. So, and I believe the way that AI is going, and Sensei, which is the underlying entity of that does the artificial intelligence, so it's in Photoshop, it's in other apps, Firefly, etc. That bit of artificial, I believe it's going to replace that auto button. So you, at the moment, the auto button looks at it as a technical exercise. Okay, so it's not overexposed, it's not underexposed, it looks at all the pixels and so on, and it's a technical image. So that's what the auto does. We have black and white, just literally makes it black and white. There we go. And I'm just going to go Command Z to undo, take me back to the color version. And we've also got HDR. So if you took a bracketed image, which this is of a bracketed image. So if I go right click, show in library, there we go, they're bracketed images. So I go down, there we go. So there's my one finger, two fingers. So they're slightly, you can see this one's slightly darker. I can process them as an HDR image, and I have a high dynamic range monitor, so I can process it as an HDR image.
The next after you've merged them?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So I get the full spectrum. So if I press the HDR button, this isn't HDR, this image. So I'll just go through that because I've never done it on this. You can see I've now got two histograms. I've got a standard and I've got an HDR histogram. So, but it's only for HDR monitors. So, I pressed auto, just in this case. Underneath it is profiles. Now, a preset in Lightroom Classic and Lightroom and other applications is a recipe of color, highlights, exposure, contrast, tone curve, all the different things that we can adjust, just like a recipe of making spaghetti bolognese. You've got the ingredients, but a preset is how we make the spaghetti bolognese in Lightroom. Okay, Lightroom Classic. So we can apply a particular preset, which is a recipe of tonal adjustments to the image. Okay, so that's blue sky. It's applied, or it's giving me a preview of what it would look like. A profile is a camera setting. It's how the camera will or could have applied a recipe in camera. And what you can do is, if I just stop sharing for a second, you can have these. This is called a swatch or a color checker. And these are known colors. Okay. They are industry, they've been around for years and years and years. They're industry set colors. And you can create a profile for your camera. Okay. Why would you do that? A Canon red, a Fuji red, and a Sony red, and a Nikon red are different reds. Okay. Just like Heinz tomato sauce, Branson tomato sauce, Tesco's Lidl tomato sauce, Tesco's, Lidl's, and Morrison's tomato. They all taste different amounts of vinegar, different amounts of tomato in it, different colorings, different this and so on. They're all tomato sauce, but they're different colorings. And the recipe of these colors is specific to a manufacturer. Okay? So you can create a style that mimics a particular recipe from camera. So picture controls, Nikon call them, Canon calls them something else, Fuji will call them so. And you can apply a picture style, picture control, to a file in the image. 9 times out of 10 it'll be JPEG, but you can do it in RAW if you have the appropriate software. So Nikon is NX Studio. So you can mimic, and a lot of people do this for film processes. So do we remember T-Max, Velvia, Provia, Astral, Agfa? We can simulate those styles in camera and replicate it in Classic. And that's what the profile thing is for. Okay. So in my case, I think this remember we talked about, I press I. This was taken with a Nikon Z7. So I know what profile to apply. So I come down and I would find my profiles. There is my Nikon Z7. Do you see it? If I hover over it, can you just see a slight difference in colors? If you look into the sky, you'll see it gets a bit bluer. So it's changing from the Adobe standard to what my camera saw in colors. Okay. It's very specific for product photography or corporate branding and so on. What the camera saw as a reference point and what the monitor displays right through to printing. So that's what profiles are. But if you're a landscape photographer, you can buy profiles, but you can just go to Adobe RAW, and here's some Adobe ones. So you can have a nice vivid one, there's a standard one, landscape one, and it's processing the colors from camera slightly differently. And that's what the profiles are for. Okay, so that's that section there. White balance. Do we all know what white balance is? That's a question. So let's come out of here again. So white balance is the color of the light. Daylight is 10,000 degrees Kelvin, if I remember rightly. And we have a thing called a grey card. A grey card. That grey is 50% white and 50% black. We call it 8% grey, 18% grey. And this is neutral. You can get them, especially if you do video, showing you, with 3. So you've got a black point, a white point, and a grey point. So you have all the points from 0 light to 255, which is pure white, to middle grey. That's 50% of those two. And this will give you the right colour of light. Now, most cameras, if you shoot in RAW, you can adjust that. But if you're not shooting RAW or you're in video, you can set it in camera. So you can select a shot. Okay, so auto, so what it thinks, what Lightroom thinks, auto, our shot, daylight, and we can start seeing that the colors slightly change. But we also have this little pipette. And if I had my gray card in the image, I would go and click on the gray card in the image, and it would process the colors exactly right, because the camera is looking for middle gray. So if I look for something that's middle gray, so about here in the background, that's middle gray. And I've now set my color temperature, which is 5050. But I can manually slide. See, it's gone very blue. And see, I'm changing the color of the light. But I can just click in the box and type the numbers in there. So 5050. And that's about right. Bearing in mind, 80% of men are color deficient by 20%. So you can set what you want to do. So auto, as shot was 5,000. Auto was 7,500. Now I don't think that's right for me. Let's bring it down. There we go, that's a bit better. I think that's about better, but it's 5,100. Okay. All right. So that's my color of my light. And but also you have tint. So you can go to green to magenta, and you can apply a tint to it as well, which is more of a fine adjustment. Okay, everyone all right with that?
Yep.
So then we have the next two panels, which are tone, okay, which is exposure. So exposure is how bright or how dark an image is, and it relates to the histogram. So in the histogram, which is all a histogram is a bar graph of values of light and the three color channels. So the lighter color, the gray, is the bar graph. So if you think of this, this is the y-axis, and this is an x-axis in the bar graph in maths, and this is 0. This is bottom right-hand corner is 255, and at the top is 100. So these are all points on a bar graph. So the grey one is exposure, and then you've got the green, red, and blue channel, RGB. Okay, and they're the values of the exposure or colours on those colour channels. So there's 5 regions within a histogram. So we have the blacks, the shadows, and I'm going towards the right, so it's getting brighter. I've got exposure, highlights, and whites. Now I can, you see my mouse has changed. I've got a line with 2 arrows. I can click and hold, and I can expand or reduce the exposure in the histogram. Okay, how I want the image to look. And all I'm doing is I'm hitting in the exposure, and I'm just moving the histogram. But it's also moving the slider. I can do it on the slider if I wish, or I can type in the box. Type 1, and it's 1 stop over. But it's a tonal adjustment. Okay, so I'm going to go something like that. Okay, now if I press the letter J on my keyboard, this is what they call the clipping mask, and we bring up 2 little triangles in the histogram. When they are black, as you can see the top right hand corner, it hasn't clipped. When they're white, they've clipped. If you get these blue marks, that means the black point, the darkest part of the image, is blacker than black. It's below 0. Okay, so we can move the, now you can see I've got red. What I've done there, and you can see the triangle and the histogram's gone white. I have blown out my highlights. Okay, I've overexposed technically. Okay, so I might sit there and go, well, actually, the foreground is about what I want it to be. It's a third of a stop overexposed. That's about right. But it's only the whites that are blown out. There's a tiny bit of the blacks, but are they meaningful? Underneath the boat is dark. Is that meaningful? Not really. It's not a part of the image, but the clouds are. If I press J again, it disappears, bring J back. So what I can now do is I can use the highlights and the shadow sliders. So I can bring my highlights down. Okay. See? I can get them so they vanish, and I can do my shadows. I can open my shadows, bring my shadows down. And it's finding that balance of settings for the effect that you want. Okay. So I could bring my exposure down, press J, bring the exposure down. Now I've lost no detail in the sky, but it's got very dark in the foreground. So I could, bearing in mind there's more ways to do this than just the way I'm showing you. I'm only using the basic panel. Okay. And I talk a lot about a base image. Okay, and that's what I'm trying to create with my basic panel, a base image. Okay, in values of crop, alignment, and settings in the panel. Okay, so the highlight shadow brings down the highlight section of the bar graph in the histogram, and the shadows opens or closes, makes the dark parts, the shadow, which is the second section in, opens it up. Now, we also have the black and white sliders. And what these are is you're telling Lightroom what is white and what is black. So you can set a white point and a black point. And again, that's affecting by pushing the whites, you're overexposing. Now, what you can do is if you hold the Shift key, you can double click on the word white, and it will set a technically correct white point. If we look at the histogram, there's no triangle in the box, and it's not overexposed. It's technically correct, which is different for a visual effect. You might not want it to be, you might want a part of the image to be very white or a part of the image to be very black. And we call that crushing the blacks. So again, I'm holding my Shift key, double click on the word black, and it sets my black point, in this case, as +5. Now, what I would normally do is I would go back to my highlights and shadow sliders and my exposure and just fine tweak my settings. And this is a correctly exposed histogram. It's not blown out. There's no darks. And I've told Lightroom, this is my black point, this is my white point, and these are my exposures, as in the shadows and the highlights and the contrasts. So let's talk about modifying keys while we're here. So if I hold the Alt and the Option key on the black slider, bring the blacks down, the screen goes white, and you can start to see where the black points are. Okay. Now, sometimes you might want those to be black. So if I turn the J, the clipping off, you can now see we've got the shadow around these boats. It's more pronounced. The blacks are being crushed. So I hold the Option key down again, Option or Alt, and I'm playing with the black slider and I'm looking at, is this a part of the image that is important to my editing style? I would argue these shadows might be, because it's telling me the sun is off to the right of the image. So I now dance with my sliders. Okay, what is my black point? And in this case, it's -56. But if I shift and click on black, it gives me +4. it's a different effect. Now, shadows aren't so strong around the bow. I'm going to bring it down to about, I can type in the box, minus 56. That's what it was. Okay. Is that a style that I'm going for? But at this point, I'm looking to do a base edit. Okay. And I can do the same with the whites. So I'm holding the Option Alt key and I'm pushing to the right. I'm telling, but I'm visually looking at the screen, what is a meaningful white. See, this is blown out here on this blue boat in the bottom right hand corner. So I bring that back and now that's not blown out anymore. So I could bring my highlights down. And bear in mind, this is all global. I can adjust all this with masks, which we're going to look at in a few weeks' time. So I'm trying to get a base image. This is before I stylize, which is different to what we're doing here. Okay, so now we have contrast. Contrast is a global setting, and it's the difference between the darks and the whites. So we can push the histogram. Can you see the histogram moving? And what I'm doing is I'm either stretching the values between points. So I'm stretching the differences between the blacks and the whites or the RGB channel, or I'm bringing them together. So if I go minus, it brings them together. So it's making the numbers squash together. Okay. Some images work like that. Some it's down to your style, how you want to do it, but it's not so contrast. It's a bit softer. And I would argue today with modern mirrorless cameras that most of them are really, really sharp. So sometimes we want to add or take away some of that sharpness in the contrast. And this is where our texture, clarity, and dehaze comes into. Texture is the fine details in the image. And it's pushing the fine details, stretching that contrast apart. Okay. The clarity is mid-tones. So it's the mid-exposure. And again, are we making them more contrasty or less contrasty at a pixel level? But it's like the mid-tones. And dehaze, you can see in the back of this image, we've got some haze here. Dehaze will actually address, it's the part of the histogram between the highlights and the whites. So it's the right-hand side of the histogram. And that's where it's adjusting. So if you can see, can you look at the right-hand side of the histogram? It's moving and it's bumping it all to that section of the histogram. And that's where the dehaze is. It's in that bright section of the histogram. Okay. My opinion and style is those three sliders, the maximum I take them to is like 20, because I don't want to over contrast or under contrast too much as a general statement. So that's those. And then the last two sliders are vibrance and saturation, colors. The difference between the two, saturation is like a strong manipulation globally of all the colors. So you would never, in my opinion, use saturation on a portrait or very, very small amounts. And vibrance is the mid-tone colors. So it's in the middle of the histogram. So they're a lot more subtle, especially on greens, etc. Okay, a lot more subtle. Now, if you press the Shift key, if I remember rightly, that will reset a lot of the sliders and double click. And if we press the Alt and Option key, we get reset, and we can reset the whole panels. So I just clicked on Reset Tone, got Reset here, and it's resetting, so it's taking us back. If I've done something wrong, Command Z, and it will reset that back to jump back one step. Okay. And that is your basic panel. One more thing, we can turn off I press and hold the little eye, which is to the left. Each of these panels have got little eyes. Okay. And there it is with or without, or we can do Y and backslash. If you've got no eye, that means you haven't done anything in that panel. So the tone curve, I've not done anything in the tone curve, and there's nothing in the panel. But as soon as I do something, it comes on. Okay, so that's why they're grayed out. Okay, again, I'm in the solo mode. So as I open another panel, it closes. So if you want solo panel, it's right click solo panel. And there we go. Basic panel. But use your modifying keys. Option or Alt will allow you on the black and white sliders. Shift and double click will technically is different to aesthetically pleasing. Okay. So technically a 13mm bolt is a 13mm spanner, but aesthetically a 1/2 inch spanner will undo a 13mm bolt because they're virtually the same in dimensions. Anyone got any questions?
Can I just ask a very quick one?
Yes, David.
I mean, it was interesting that you said that men, tend not to see color cast, because I don't. So when I used to use Photoshop, I used to be able to check for that, but I hadn't realized I could do that in Lightroom. So the way you showed it, but your 18% gray, it appeared on the image. How did you do that? Is that something that you've just added?
So when I use the pipette, I'm gauging at the screen, and there's actually numerical values in the swatch on the tool. So if I go to the sort, and you'll see there are, can you see this numerical values? And what I'm trying to do technically is get the values virtually the same. So if you look at the bottom of the screen now, and on the recording, I'll zoom in, it says red 44, green 44, blue 44. So the channels are virtually, and that's middle gray. When they're all virtually the same, that's middle gray, because I'm on this gray part of the beach. Okay, and the camera is looking for middle gray. Okay, so when you take an exposure, it's middle gray it's looking for.
So when you find that, how do you set it as that?
You just click
on the okay.
You just literally use the pipette and just go left click and click. That's it, done.
Okay, thank you.
And that's why in the photograph, in your first picture, you take your picture in front of the camera and you have this in front of the camera, click like that, and that's your grey point. So you can just put the pipette on it and go boom, that's it. And then that is the exact white balance of the image for the light that's in wherever you are. But you might want, these aren't expensive. I've had these years. These are plastic. They're like credit cards. And I've got the black point, I've got the white point, I've got the grey. So if I want to go across to Photoshop and click on a black point, because there's more in Photoshop that I can do, I can choose either point. But I only use this for my meaningful work. Okay. Does that help? Okay, you're welcome. Anyone else? Any other questions? No? Silence. Was it of help? Did it help you? Yeah? Okay.
Yeah. Certainly clarified a few things, yeah.
Yeah, well, it's a relatively easy panel to use, but the modifying keys are quite handy. And what I do is in my workflow, I always set the white and the black point first. And what I'm trying to do is create a base image. That's a good starting point to create a virtual copy and go off a particular direction in stylization. All I want to do, and it's all global, this base edit, before I want to go off and say, right, I'm going to do the sky this, I'm going to do some dodging and burning there, I'm going to bring this color out here and so on. And if I don't like it, I can just leave that virtual copy and come back to my base image, create a new virtual copy. and take it in a different direction. And then compare them all. Okay. And bear in mind, I'm not creating another file. I'm creating a line in the database. So if I was doing this in Photoshop, I'd go file, save as a new file, then go back and then make another copy, file, save as, etc. I know I could do layers, but then I would then have windows in Photoshop of all the images open. I can have them in compare mode in the library module, and I can look at them all. And I can pick and reject, and they would disappear in my culling. Classic is designed for photographers. Photoshop is a lot more things, and it does a lot more things than what Classic does and Lightroom. But sometimes we just want to edit our images. We don't want to manipulate our images, which is what we can do in Photoshop.
How did you get your camera preset?
The profiles.
Yeah, how did you actually preset your camera?
Okay, so if you're talking about taking that, when you buy one of these, which I think I paid about £25 for mine in year 1846. It's quite old, this one, because these are light type. What you do is you get an app that comes with it, and you take a photograph of this in neutral light, normally outside with no shadow or anything on it, and literally square on. You just shoot down to it, 35mm lens, something like that, 35mm, 50mm lens, shoot down to it flat, no shadow cast on it, and you take that picture. The app that you download on their website, you then import that image into it, and it will create the profile for that specific camera with the serial number and everything. Okay. Yeah. And then what you do is you come into where the profiles are, you click on the 4 squares, and it's a little plus, and you import that profile.
Yeah.
You go and find it, and it will appear here. You'll have to close Lightroom and open it back up again. And there is a plugin, if I remember rightly, as well, that goes with it. So you can select an image that you've already taken and run it through the algorithm, the plugin that's in here, and it will create that for you. But when you create a profile, you have to restart Classic.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, but because these are known colors, it's the software that Lightroom Classic knows what the colors are and knows what the camera's taken and will adjust them accordingly to show you that color. And that's when you need also something like one of these, which is a color spectrometer, I think it's called, which you then set your screen up. So what you capture to what you display is exactly the same. Okay. But if you're taking a landscape photograph, do you need that? You're stylizing the landscape, how you want to present the landscape. There's not precise colors involved. So it's a particular niche market.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's not for everybody. I used to do a lot of product photography, so these are legacy products of mine. Okay, but it is very handy especially when you print. I use a local printing service, and what I see on the screen, I know is what's going to come out of the printer.
So what screen have you got? What camera?
It's a BenQ, BenQ 30. Yeah, but BenQ. I've always had BenQ. You pay for what you get. This was £1,700, I think this one was, and I've had it for years. And they do exactly what they say on the tin. So I like BenQ, so it's never let me down. So that's my opinion. Some other people have other opinions based on it. It's a Canon, Nikon, something a Canon, Nikon. No, I'm Fuji. Yeah, but anyway, anyone have any questions? So that's it for this evening.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll put the recording together and it'll be up on YouTube over the weekend. It's no community on Monday because it's a bank holiday. There will be an email out on Monday with some recording links, and our next live is on Wednesday, 7 o'clock, and we're going to be looking at workflow of stop using ratings, or I'm going to get you to think about how you use your ratings. Okay.
Thank you.
Have a good weekend, everybody. Take care.
And you take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.